Hey, thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen here because I will have some slides that'll help you follow along. There it is. All right. So as Andrew said, my name is Peter Andrastek. I'm a senior consultant with the Evangelical Catholic. Evangelical Catholic is a nonprofit. We're a nonprofit organization that's based in Madison, Wisconsin. But we have, people who kind of live and work all over the place, and we partner with ministries all over the country, really all over the world, mostly with parishes, but also with some campus ministries and military bases. And what we do is we partner with the ministry staff and we form and train them to form and train the lay faithful for apostolate, to start movements of evangelization in their communities. And so that's essentially what we do. Today, I'd like to introduce you to the idea of small groups and their place in evangelization. So today is going to be kind of an orientation to this topic. We're going to take it from kind of a really high level sort of a place, kind of like an orientation. We're not going to get really granular with things. At the end of April, we're going to do a 4-part series where we will get a little bit more granular on this. But today is, like I said, just a high level orientation about this topic to help orient us, to help situate us, to better understand, small groups and their place in starting movements of evangelization in our communities. So I would like to begin in prayer. I know we already prayed, but I'd like to pray again. There's a prayer that I like to pray before any type of study, written by St. Thomas Aquinas. And so you can just follow along with this prayer and pray it in your hearts. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Grant, O merciful God, that we may ardently desire, prudently examine, truthfully acknowledge, and perfectly accomplish what is pleasing to you, for the praise and glory of your name. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So we're going to take this in 4 parts, and after each part, we're going to take some time for questions, because it'd be a lot to go through, an hour's worth of material and then have questions at the end. So 4 parts. The first part is going to be Evangelization 101. So we're going to just kind of get oriented to the idea of evangelization, and specifically, we're going to zero in on the lay faithful's vocation within evangelization. Then we're going to move into the idea of small groups. Then we're going to, for the third part, look at the role of the parish in this mission. And then finally, we're going to look at how to get started. So without further ado, let's get into this. So Evangelization 101. Let's get all on the same page here. Let's define some terms. What is evangelization? Right here there's many ways of defining evangelization and thinking about evangelization, but this is perhaps my favorite way to think about evangelization. It comes from a document from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith that came out about 20 years ago. It is, evangelization is to proclaim Jesus Christ by one's words and actions. That is, to make oneself an instrument of his presence and action in the world. I love this description of evangelization because it really focuses on the mystical dimension of evangelization. If you look at this definition, this really closely resembles the definition of a sacrament, right? A sacrament is an instrument of God's presence and action in the world. And in a certain sense, in a very real sense, when we evangelize, we become like a little s sacrament. You have the big S sacraments, the 7 sacraments, but then the little s sacraments, in the sense that everything it has a sacramental dimension, right? So today we celebrate, the solemnity of the Annunciation, which is really the incarnation of the Word, where the Word becomes flesh in the womb of our Blessed Mother. And there's this beautiful sacramental dimension to everything, right? Where God breaks into creation, and in his body, he makes visible that which is invisible. That which cannot be contained becomes contained. And so in evangelization, we bring into the visible world that which is invisible. okay, the image of God. And not only do we bring that into the world, we become an instrument of his presence and action. Okay. I love this understanding because if we don't grasp the mystical understanding of evangelization, we're going to reduce evangelization to something that we do for the parish, something that we do for the church. And we could kind of take that to its furthest extent and reduce evangelization to volunteer activity, okay? And it's not that, okay? Evangelization isn't simply doing stuff. It's not something simply that I do, okay? It's becoming who we are called to be. St. Paul said, "It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Galatians 2:20, okay? He says, "I've been crucified with Christ. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live, in the flesh I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." Galatians 2:20. It's my favorite verse of the whole Bible because in a certain sense, it's the kerygma. It's the kernel. It contains everything, okay? The Catechism, number 521 in the Catechism, says that Christ enables us to live in him all that he himself lived, and he lives it in us. We are called only to become one with him, okay? The placement of that only is significant, okay? It's our only call to become one with him. And we need to continue to accomplish in ourselves the stages of his life and his mysteries. Essentially, that's what it means to become a mystic, to become immersed in the mysteries of God and to live those mysteries, to prolong them, to complete them, to perfect them in our lives, okay? In a certain sense, you know, the Christian vocation is to become one and the same thing with Jesus. The early church fathers used to say that the Son of God became a son of man so that sons of men might become sons of God. In the Eucharist, we become what we eat. In a mystical sense, we're consumed by him. So our deepest identity really is to be Jesus himself, such that my thoughts become his thoughts, my desires become his desires, and vice versa. We become one and the same thing with him. And so really what this means is that holiness and evangelization essentially are one and the same thing. They're all really only conceptually distinct. Okay, this is important, okay, because again, if we separate holiness and evangelization is reduced to things that we do. It's reduced to becoming involved in parish activities. It's reduced to volunteering. But in reality, holiness and evangelization are the same thing. Can we separate Jesus's identity from his mission? No, we can't, because Jesus is the Word. He is the Word become flesh, okay? And a word, its identity is its mission, okay? Mission and identity converge in Jesus. And when we're baptized, we become mystically him. Okay, St. Peter says we become partakers in the divine nature. So, can we separate our identity as sons and daughters from our mission as redeemers? Is there such a thing as fire that doesn't radiate heat? In this sense, evangelization, like I said earlier, is less about doing something for the church and more about being someone for someone. Essentially, that's what evangelization is. When you think about it this way, like let's get back to this: holiness and evangelization are one. Okay, take for example, if you're working on, if you're praying the rosary, okay, and you're praying the rosary for someone, are you growing in holiness or are you evangelizing? Yes, right? Okay, if you're going to Mass and you're offering your Mass for someone, okay, are you evangelizing or are you growing in holiness? Yes. If you're working on a particular virtue, let's say you're working on being more attentive to your coworkers or being more attentive to your spouse, is that holiness or is that evangelization? Yes, it's all of the above. We distinguish them conceptually so that we can think about them and work on things, just like we distinguish all sorts of aspects of our life so that we can work on them and focus on them to become better. But essentially, it's the same thing. Okay, so that's evangelization. Evangelization is being an instrument of Jesus's presence and action in the world. It's being him. Now, evangelization is the church's vocation, it's her deepest identity and mission. Evangelii Nuntiandi, Pope Paul VI said this. He said that evangelization is the grace and vocation proper to the church. It's her deepest identity. She exists in order to evangelize. Now, where's the church? Is the church, over in Richmond at the Chancery? Is the church over in Rome? Is the church at your parish? Yes, but interior to that, the church is within each of us. The church is interior to me. So you need to be able to, not just because you work for the church, but like no matter what you do, if you stay at home, if you're retired, if you're an engineer, you have to be able to insert your name into that. Okay, evangelization is in fact the grace and vocation proper to Patricia. It's her deepest identity. Patricia exists in order to evangelize. For the Christian vocation, by its very nature, is a vocation to the apostolate. Apostolate is just another name for evangelization for our purposes. And then Jesus himself said, by this is my Father glorified. How do we glorify the Father? By bearing much fruit. And by this we prove to be his disciples. Proof of discipleship is apostolate, is evangelization. So we can look at a little examination of conscience in there. Am I burning to spread the gospel? If not, then something must be wrong. Something must be between me and Jesus. Okay? So now let's focus in on the lay faithful, which is like 99% of the church, okay? Okay, the lay faithful as distinguished from religious and clergy. The lay faithful are those Christians who by their very vocation seek the kingdom of God in and through the ordinary circumstances of everyday life, school, work, family, social, civic, all those sorts of things, okay? Secularity, okay, the church in Lumen Gentium says that secularity is what characterizes the lay faithful. So it's what specifies the lay faithful. So the whole church has a secular dimension. Now, secularity, actually, let's look at that word really briefly here. Secularity, not to be confused with secularism, okay? Anytime there's an ism at the end of the word, our antenna should go up. We should be a little bit suspicious, except when it's Catholicism, okay? That's the one exception to isms, okay? So, but secularity comes from a Latin word, secula, which means of the world, okay, or of the age. And so the whole church has a secular dimension. Even religious have a secular dimension. Okay, they exist to be a sign for the world of the end. Okay, so what specifies religious is their eschatological dimension. Okay, they give up the secula for the sake of the secula. Okay, they give up through poverty, chastity, and obedience. They become a sign saying that this is not all there is, okay? Priests are defined by priestly ministry, okay? By the ministerial dimension of the priesthood. The lay faithful, we are defined by secularity. Specifically that we feel a gravitational pull towards the world. We feel a gravitational pull toward secular interests, secular hobbies, secular work, secular music, all of these things. We're called to figure out how to live poverty without giving things up. We're called to figure out how to passionately love the world so that we can redeem the world. Okay? Our vocation is to sanctify the temporal order, sanctify the world. In a certain sense, we are in the world and in a certain sense of the world, because the world defines us. The secular dimension defines us as the lay faithful. Okay. What does this have to do with what we're talking about today? Well, if the lay vocation is to be secular, that means the lay apostolate is also secular, okay? It takes place in the world, and it kind of takes on an of the world dimension, okay? So in other words, it means that for the lay faithful, the primary locus of our vocation and of our apostolate is part of our vocation, right? Is the locus is not the parish. The locus of our lives, of our holiness, of our apostolate is the world. Pope Pius XII said that the laity are in the front line of the church's life. It is through them that she is the vital principle of human society. So the front lines of the church's life, okay? So the question is, where are you, okay? Like in your day-to-day life, you are the front lines of the church, okay? You're the front lines, whether that's at the gym, at the office, a high-rise building, on the farm, at the ball field, at a family reunion, in your home, wherever you are, that's where we're the front lines of the church's life. And it is through us that the church is the vital principle. In other words, the soul of human society. We are to the world what the soul is to the body. And every time you separate a soul from a body, what happens? Death. Okay? When we as lay faithful try to separate ourselves from the world, there's a certain death that begins to happen in our vocation. Okay? Now, that separation from the world, that's a religious vocation, and it's beautiful. And we venerate it. It's wonderful. But the lay vocation is to be immersed in the world. Because if we're not there, if we're not bringing the church to the world, who is? Each person is called in a special way to bring the good news to the places and circumstances where only he or she can. Again, father's not going to be at the gym, or, sister is not going to be at the shooting range, or wherever people are, right? I don't know, right? So like wherever we are, this is where we're called to bring the good news. And it's only through us. And this evangelization acquires a special property and peculiar efficacy. Okay? So it's effective because it is secular. Okay? People who live in the world, they're gonna, if we come on too strong and too like in your face Catholic, they kind of, oh, that's like too much, right? But because we're living our holiness with naturalness and a sense of normalcy, not using all sorts of religious words and theological words and just doing the things that lay people do, that's gonna draw people in. And then through our conversation, that's where we begin to like open up lights for them. So that's part one, okay? Part one is, again, evangelization 101. Evangelization is becoming an instrument of his presence and action in the world, okay? And it's our deepest identity and vocation. And for the lay faithful, it's accomplished in the middle of the world. The world is the locus of our Christian vocation. Questions before we move on?
Peter, we don't have any submitted questions yet, but I just wanted to comment that it's, I think when many people think about evangelization, they don't necessarily think about the personal holiness, but rather the outward signs of working or meeting with other people. And so it's so interesting that this is the start where where you're basing everything off of. It's the personal relationship and building that first.
Yes. Yes. And everything has a redemptive quality, a redemptive value. Okay. I want to read you a line from the Catechism here. I might be jumping ahead. I might have this quoted somewhere else, but number 516 and 517 of the Catechism, talking about the characteristics of Jesus's mysteries. It says, Christ's whole earthly life, his words, his deeds, his silences, his sufferings, indeed his manner of being and speaking is revelation of the Father. So if our vocation is only to become one with him, we have to aspire to this same identity. So we need to be able to insert our name in that, okay? So I don't know if there's a Bob online, but I'm going to put Bob's name in there. Number 516, Bob's whole earthly life, Bob's words and deeds, his silences and sufferings, indeed his manner of being and speaking, must become revelation of the Father. Because our Lord became man in order to do his Father's will, even the least characteristics of his mysteries, even the least characteristics of Bob's life must manifest God's love among us. His whole life is a mystery of redemption. It's just beautiful that we do tend to overlook, especially in church world, where we're trying to like make our ministries better and do sorts of things. We can get caught up in this sense that like evangelization is doing stuff, right? And it is, okay. There's a reality that we're going to get to that, but at its baseline, it needs to be everything. Yeah, thanks for drawing that out.
Yeah, and Peter, we did just get one question. So many people, this is the question, many people don't feel comfortable verbalizing their faith or their path to holiness to others because they feel like they're being pushy. But they'd rather evangelize through good works or by visibly demonstrating their faith, which can be effective too. The question is, do you agree with that? And maybe we're going to get to that, but I just wanted to pose that question which came in.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I'll answer it now. So I think it's a both and, okay? So on the one hand, that can be kind of a smokescreen or an excuse for living maybe kind of a mediocre sort of a holiness, which is a contradiction in terms, okay? So people will quote, this quote is attributed to St. Francis. I don't know, there's confusion over whether or not he said it, I don't know, but preach the gospel and when necessary use words. If he did say that, the poor guy is probably turned over in his grave, a million times, because people will say, oh, I just live my faith. And okay, on the one hand, like if we're truly living our faith, our faith is always seeking opportunities to share the word. Okay, it always is. The true apostle, there's a quote actually from one of the Vatican documents where it says something like the true Vatican II documents, where the true apostle is always on the lookout for opportunities to verbally share his or her faith. Now, that being said, yeah, we have to take into consideration our temperament and our personality, and some people are a little bit more introverted, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that we're supposed to be, that doesn't mean we're supposed to be like going door to door and all that kind of stuff. There might be a place for that as well. But here I will kind of offer a little bit of a teaser for what's coming. If we're living our faith really well, in our day-to-day life, especially for people who live in more of a secular environment, it would be kind of weird and unnatural for us to be just like being all Jesus, Jesus, Jesus all the time and verbalizing. It would be off-putting to people. Instead, we live our faith with a radical holiness, radical not meaning goofy and showy, but radical meaning to the core, root, radish, okay, root, core, to the core, a holiness that transforms our entire being. But in doing that, that's attractive. That's attractive. And we grow in friendship with people. And when we want to become a little bit more intentional about that evangelization, we grow in our friendship with people. Maybe we start something like a small group, and our witness of our lives gives credibility. And then when we invite people into friendship, that's where the comfort level grows to a point where we can now verbally share the good news. So that's a good transition to kind of move into the next part.
Great. Thanks, Peter.
Sure. So small groups, okay? What's the place of small groups in evangelization? Well, I kind of hinted at it, or more than hinted, but let's get into this. So small groups are a great way to be intentional and organized in our apostolate. So everything we do is apostolate. That's just a review of the last section. Because as sons and daughters in the Son, everything we do in him has a redemptive evangelical dimension. I just read 5:16 and 5:17 from the Catechism. Everything has a redemptive value. Even the things that we do quietly and privately, the things that don't have someone on the other end of it, there's a redemptive value to that. Nevertheless, like anything in life that's important to us, there are times when we need to give special attention to becoming intentional and organized. You want to run a marathon? You need to get more intentional and more organized with your life, creating time to do it and making a plan and all those things, right? If you want to get a master's degree, you have to become intentional and organized about it. You want to become better at, I don't know, doing some task at work, you're gonna focus on it for a while. Small groups are a great way to become more intentional and organized in our apostolate. And this leads to becoming both more fruitful and more holy. Okay. How is this becoming more holy? I thought evangelization is kind of the radiation of holiness. Well, yes, it is. Okay. There's an ontological priority to holiness. From holiness, apostolate radiates forth. Okay. But at the same time, as we do things, we become more of what we do. Okay, John Paul II would say that as human beings, we are our own efficient cause. That means that as we do things that are more prudent, we become more prudent. As we do things that are more just, we become just. As we do things that are, more, I don't know, even vices, we become what we do as we rep things out. Okay, as we rep it out, we become more that way. So as we focus more on our apostolic efforts, we will become more apostolic and therefore holier. Okay, we'll become holier. So small groups are a great way to become more intentional and organized. Let's just break down some of the benefits of a small group apostolate, okay? Small groups are very nimble and very flexible for the lay apostle. For someone who wants to become organized and intentional, they can do it whenever they want, whatever time of the day. It fits theirs. They can fit it to their schedule and to their life circumstances like a glove. They can do it where they want. Ideally, this is not being done at the parish. It should be done in a setting that is more conducive to friendship and just kind of comfort. I know of people who have small groups in coffee shops, in basements, in living rooms. I know of a guy who does it in a garage. I know of a guy who runs a small group, who hosts a small group in a liquor store because one of the guys in his group owns a liquor store. And so they meet at 7 a.m. in this liquor store. So like they're nimble and flexible. They can do it for however long they want, okay? So it could be over a lunch break where you only have about 45 minutes to do it, or you can do it, in the morning or at night for an hour, hour and a half. And it can go for as long longitudinally as you're able, okay? So sometimes apostolate is kind of quick because it's a season in your life and you only have a couple months to do it. But sometimes you're working with people who need more of a slow, long soak because you're dealing with people who have a lot of questions and who are kind of hesitant, and it might take years. And so you can customize it to the people who the Lord has brought to you in your life. You can invite whoever you want. You can add a level of intensity however you want. You can go like a real deep dive, or you can kind of stay on the surface of things. It's a great opportunity for lay people to exercise the charisms that are peculiar to them. Each of us has different charisms. And when there is kind of a mandate to do this thing from the top down, there are times for that, but it might not give me the opportunity to exercise my charism. If I have a charism, if I have a desire and a charism for a specific topic or a specific angle on the gospel, I can do that, and I can address the desires of the people who I'm inviting in a very customized way. It creates community, okay? This is why it's so important to do it like not at the parish. Sometimes it has to be done at the parish because of, a common space that's kind of close for everyone, whatever. But, if I'm doing it in my living room or wherever, it creates more of a friendship environment. And for the lay faithful, friendship is really kind of like the base setting of evangelization, because it creates trust. Okay, this is for those people, especially who don't like to be very verbal with the gospel. Okay, if they're building friendship with people, their friendship is going to arouse curiosity, trust, and curiosity in people, and that will create a safe place for them to verbalize the good news, if it's within the context of friendship. And it creates a setting for intentional discussion, which helps to create a funnel into more intentional types of apostolate. What do I mean by this? So let's say, for example, I've got a bunch of friends or a bunch of acquaintances, let's say other school dads, maybe a coworker, and I haven't, they know that I'm a Catholic guy. They know that I take my faith seriously. Maybe they're a little bit intrigued by it, but it would be a little uncomfortable, maybe for them, maybe for me, to just kind of dive into a one-on-one conversation with them about it. So let's say I say, hey, I want to do a guys group. And so I pray about it, and I discern, who of my friends and acquaintances to invite into this. And I invite a handful of these guys into a guys group. Now that I've invited them into a guys group, we're able to have intentional discussion about spiritual things. And by me inviting them and them saying yes, that has given me implicit permission to get more one-on-one with them and to go deeper, because we're going to have a discussion about spiritual things, and we're all going to be bringing different perspectives and different angles. It's going to kind of excite or arouse the beginnings of faith in people. It's going to arouse, deepen faith in people. And so people are going to have questions, and I'm going to see that, and I'm going to hear that. And it wouldn't be weird for me to say, hey, let's go get a drink. Let's go get a happy hour, next week. And so I get together with one of the guys, and we just start talking about the day and everything else. And then I can say, hey, last week at group, we were talking about this, and you had a really interesting question. And so then I can bring that up, and that segues into a deeper faith discussion. And as we do that more, he's going to bring something new to the group, and that's going to bring the group to a deeper level. So the group kind of creates this funnel into deeper and deeper faith discussions. So small groups contain within them like a quasi-infinite potential for intentional apostolate. It also promotes ownership of apostolate. Okay, what do I mean by that? Oftentimes when we do kind of parish-centered initiatives, and people see themselves as volunteers, they don't own the apostolate. They see themselves as, let's say, for example, for Lent, we're going to do small groups this Lent, and we're going to have signups at the parish. Okay, so let's say, oh yeah, I'll volunteer to lead a group. If no one signs up for my group, I guess maybe the Lord is calling me not to do a small group, or maybe I'll just join another group or whatever, right? I kind of see myself as a volunteer. But if I'm equipped to have ownership in my apostolate, and I start my own group by inviting people, now I own this apostolate. Ownership consists of initiative, okay? Small groups are effective to the extent that they promote ownership in people, initiative. Best case scenario is I'm inviting people. I'm praying about who to invite. I'm inviting them into my group. I have intentionality. That means that I put prayerful thought into the people. I get to know them. I pray about and think about what people need in my group. What did so-and-so say last week, and what might that mean, okay? I'm praying for them intentionally. I'm thinking about what the next steps are for people. I'm thinking about my relationship with them. I'm praying about it. Maybe I'm sacrificing for them. Maybe I initiate a little daily sacrifice for the people in my group. So there's intentionality to it. there's organization to it, okay? So I have to put it in my calendar. I have to prepare for it. I have to work together with them to choose the resource that we're going to be doing. So there's a level of organization that's involved with ownership and follow through, okay? I think, follow through means that I'm getting together with people. I'm having, I'm having them over. I'm following up on something that they shared last week that was intense or difficult. There's all sorts of ways to follow through. So the great thing about small group apostolate is it promotes ownership in these ways. So that's just kind of an idea of the benefits of small group apostolate. Any questions?
Yeah, Peter. So we've got one, and it's specifically regarding youth-centered small groups.
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's something that when we get into when we offer the trainings in April that are going to be more intensive, we're going to be looking at that specifically. But I'm going to go ahead and ask the question now. So, as I'm sure is the case in Wisconsin, here in Virginia, we obviously have a lot of rules around working with youth for their safety and safe environment. So the question is, do you have any advice on creating and sustaining small groups with youth? Some of the advantages of small groups that you just described, such as meeting anywhere outside of a parish, that gets a lot harder within the context of youth, and being able to meet with them and making sure that we're still following the safe environment guidelines.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I'm gonna kind of first of all, the EC, when we work with parishes, our primary emphasis is adults. And so on the surface of it, I'm going to have a harder time answering that question. And so really what I would say is, for those of you who are youth ministry specialists, I think you're going to be the best people to figure out the logistics of those sorts of things. But that being said, what we have seen is that, parishes that have attempted to do this in a youth ministry context, usually they have parents or young adults who have a charism for dealing with younger people. Those people receive the safe environment sort of training, and then they can host them as more of like a youth ministry application of small groups. That being said, as an apostolate that individual youth can do, they can kind of do whatever they want. So what we're kind of jumping into right here is like, what's the role of the parish in here? And so we're going to distinguish between the ministry of the parish and the apostolate of the laity. So on the one hand, as an apostolate of the laity, the youth, any youth who's a bit more mature can do this on their own initiative. And you see this especially in like a lot of the Protestant churches, where they do a really good job forming people to have initiative. There's a lot of youth who just take the initiative and they get together with their friends for a Bible study. And that's great. There's no reason why we can't do that. And the lay faithful don't need permission to do that. And, and for a 16-year-old, they only need the permission of their parents to say, hey, can I get together with some of my friends and, have a Bible study or have a book club, after school or on a Saturday evening or something like that. Like that's a lay initiative. That's a lay apostolate initiative from a 16-year-old. But if it's something that a young adult is going to do, or a parent, that's going to be a little bit more structured and probably more of a manifestation of a parish ministry, then there's going to be some virtue stuff. I don't know if they call it that in Richmond. That's going to have to take place.
Thanks, Peter. And I'll just answer from a little of my own observations too, when it comes to parish-based, youth-based small groups, that oftentimes, parishes will have a room that is the youth room or is more comfortable, right? It's got the old couches that are older than the youth. And but meeting wherever it is most comfortable, where it feels a little bit more unorganized, is a way to kind of do that thing where you might not be able to do it at someone's house or necessarily at a coffee shop every time, but it creates that environment that Peter was talking about.
Yeah.
So another question we got is there an advantage to having men and women in separate groups?
Yes. So on the one hand, we don't really get into social engineering, okay? You must have this many men's groups and this many women's groups and this many mixed groups, because that is what I'll get to in a little bit, an expression of ministry overreach, okay? Kind of micromanaging people in their apostolate. And that always leads to decreased ownership in apostolate. That being said, you can always suggest to people, hey, you might want to think about doing a couples group or a men's group or this or that, right? So that's the power of suggestion, right? So that being said, we do see an advantage with people. We do see a pastoral advantage to men's groups and to women's groups at the parish level, okay? Why is that? Well, because, so on the one hand, there's strengths to couples groups, especially when, oftentimes you have like guys who are kind of disconnected, and oftentimes it's like the wives who take their faith more seriously. And so it's a great way for the wives to kind of drag their husbands to a group, and it's a great way to evangelize husbands, okay, to have couples groups, okay? And it's a great way for couples to build community and to get to know each other. And there's all sorts of great advantages to couples groups in particular. That being said, a disadvantage to a couples group is that there are certain things that I am not going to say or share in front of my friend's wife. And there are certain things that I'm not going to say and share in front of my wife, because maybe I'm struggling with some aspect of our relationship, and I need other guys to guide me and help me through that. And so there are distinct pastoral advantages to men's groups and women's groups. There are also distinct pastoral advantages to the couples groups, as I indicated. And there can be advantages to mixed gender groups as well, especially when you get into like campus ministry, or seniors, not seniors in college, but like senior citizens. But mixed groups can be a little tricky, because let's say I'm hosting a group and it's just going to be come one, come all. My wife's not attending, but there's other guys and other ladies that are coming to it. That puts me potentially in an awkward position, especially if there's a young lady who's starting to ask more questions and those sorts of things. It creates situations that could be tricky. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's good. The last one we'll ask here, and we're actually getting a whole host of questions now, and it's great because we'll save some of them and we'll ask them at another time. But this one I feel like really drives home a lot of what you were talking about, as you were talking about not having it at the parish and having lay ownership of it being an apostolate rather than a parish ministry. So how do you promote the idea of a small group as a parish while still giving individuals and lay people the ownership and the ability to run it?
Yeah, that is let's hold on to that question and see if it gets answered in this very next section. And if it doesn't, ask it again.
Okay, what a perfect segue. Here you go.
That's a perfect. So what is the role of the parish in small group evangelization? So the parish really ought to be a center of missionary formation for the laity, okay? Pope Francis, through all of its activities, the parish encourages and forms its members so that they might be agents of evangelization, okay? Number 28. This translation is slightly different than the English version that you're probably used to seeing. This is a more literal translation, okay? So I think the one that we're used to seeing is through all of its activities, the parishes encourages and trains its members to be evangelizers, right? Very literal translation looks a little bit more like this, which is just a little bit more nuanced, right? Encourages and forms, Okay, forms is important because if we reduce evangelization to skills training, we drive a wedge between evangelization and holiness, okay? So it's a formation thing, okay? We form its members so that they might be agents of evangelization. The Holy Spirit is the primary agent, okay? And we are instruments of the Holy Spirit. Then he says, also, I dream of a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the church's custom ways of doing things, time, schedules, language structures, I would say budgets, job descriptions, staffing decisions, everything must be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than for her self-preservation. What I would say, to put it in another word, I would say the parish really ought to be the ordinary locus of missionary formation. So missionary activity, the locus of missionary activity happens wherever the lay faithful are, okay, in the world. But the locus of that, the ordinary locus of that formation that forms them, that equips them, that shepherds them to do this, that's the parish's role, okay? That's the parish's role. So I would say it this way, the ministry of the parish ought to be focused on forming the laity for apostolate. The ministry of the parish ought to be focused on forming the laity for apostolate. And small groups, well, small groups are probably one of the best ways for the laity to be more intentional with their apostolate. Okay, one of the best ways for the lay faithful to own their apostolate is small groups. So I'm going to highlight a couple words here. Key terms here for us to be able to understand what we're doing. Why is this important? Well, words are connected to concepts, which are connected to reality. Okay? The word we see reality, and we, as we grow in understanding of it, we stand under that and we give birth, we conceive, we give birth to a word. Okay, we generate a word in our mind, okay, that concept, and then we speak it, okay? That's how words are given birth. We interact with reality, we seek to understand it, we give birth to a word, and then we start to speak. There's also an inverse relationship. The way we use words can shape the way we think, which shapes the way we interact with reality. So it's really important to understand the meaning of words. If you were to do a word search on the Vatican website, okay, and search the words ministry, and then search the word apostolate, you would find some trends. Here's what you would find. Generally, now there's always exceptions, okay? There's always nuances and exceptions, but for the sake of clarity, we're gonna speak, keep these concepts very distinct, okay? Otherwise, it gets all mushy and we can't understand anything. We're just going to assume, yes, there's exceptions here, but right now, to speak clear, we're going to distinguish sharply between these two terms. So ministry is a term that refers to activity that flows from ordination. In fact, oftentimes on the Vatican website, in Vatican documents, you will see a qualifier in front of ministry, the word sacred ministry, to help align it with ordination. Whereas apostolate is a term that, again, like sacraments, the little s sacrament is everything, big S sacrament of the seven. Apostolate is the whole church is apostolic, but then in a very specific way, it flows from baptism and confirmation. Okay, so it specifies the laity. Ministry literally means service, apostolate literally means sent. Okay, so that leads to the next kind of category of understanding, that ministry is ecclesiastical in nature, meaning that it's typically tied to a structure that has sort of defined parameters, okay? So it flows from holy orders, and then priests, bishops can delegate aspects of ministry to the lay faithful who have the expertise and the time and the charisms to do it. So a ministry is delegated. All of you who work for parish, you've been delegated a ministry. And you are serving the church. There's kind of an ad intra sort of a dimension to it. okay? And this is where well, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but this is in the Catechism. There's a passage that says that the Marian dimension of the church, or the Petrine dimension of the church, is at the service to the Marian dimension. The Petrine dimension, the ministry dimension, the service dimension, the structure dimension is at the service of the dimension of holiness. So apostolate is unstructured. Or you could say that the very structure of apostolate is to be unstructured. The very structure, the very structure of lay apostolate is to be in the world. You could say that's my office in the church, is to be secular. We're sent to the world. We're going to take Aristotelian terms here. Ministry is the efficient cause. Okay, it's the agent that directly brings about something else. It brings about apostolate. And apostolate is the final cause, the goal toward which ministry is oriented. We see this very clearly in the very last words of the Mass. Go, you are sent. Okay? The source and summit of everything the church does, the central ministry of the church, okay, the nuclear explosion of the church, you know, like, I don't know, like their terms fall short here because it's the mystery of Christ himself. From that, go, you are sent. So, how is this related to small groups? Well, I would say it's a bit of a misnomer or misleading, and we fall into traps if we speak of small group ministry, if we think of it as something that the parish runs. Parish ministry must be rooted in the building and shepherding of individuals in their apostolate, not in managing small group ministry. So in other words, what this kind of introduces us to is the notion of subsidiarity. In the Church's social doctrine, there's a principle of, one of the central principles of the Church's social doctrine is the principle of subsidiarity. Church is a theological society, and so the church needs to abide by her own social doctrine, right? The ministry of the church is kind of like the government of the church, the governing office of the church, okay, abides by the principle of subsidiarity, okay? That meaning that the structures, the larger structures of the church are ordered to building up individuals to do what's in their circle of influence to do, okay? And anytime that there's overreach, it results in a decrease in ownership. Okay, issues are best dealt with by those who are closest to them. Okay, and if the big organization is doing it for me, well, then I'm just going to kind of back off, and I'm not going to own it. But if the church is focused like a hawk on building me up and forming me to have initiative, to have intentionality, to have follow through, to have organization, now the church is doing what she ought to do, giving subsidium, giving help to me to do what's in my realm to do. And if I start to feel managed by parish staff or diocesan staff, I'm going to kind of shrink away from it. I'm going to feel, oh, I'm not doing it well enough, or, oh gosh, I have to report back. I'm going to get graded. I'm going to, and there's going to be like this sort of a, like, so the parish ministry needs to empower the faithful's ownership of their apostolate in and to the world. People must not see their role as parish as a volunteer or a ministry leader. Ministry overreach kills ownership. So let's see here. So let's go back to that original question, because I think this is a place to answer that question.
All right, I'm backtracking to it right now, Peter. right. So how do you promote the idea of a small group as a parish while still allowing for the individuals to run them and take ownership? How do you encourage people to be doing small groups as a parish?
Yeah. Okay. So first thing to understand is that the principle of subsidiarity is a very sure and certain principle. Okay. But the application of that principle can vary from time to time and place to place. So actually the next part of what we're getting into is also going to get into answering the question, how do you get this going, right? How do you promote small groups? Well, one answer is to not promote it. Like out here and having announcements and things like that. That's one way to do it, is to not promote it that way. And it's like, that seems odd. Like, why wouldn't you do that? Well, maybe in some communities you do want to do that, but in other communities, if you do that, you run the risk of relegating it to a parish ministry. And then the individuals who are doing the small groups aren't owning them. So one answer to that question is you don't promote them far and wide and broad. Another answer is that you do promote them. And perhaps the way you promote them, however, needs to be kind of nuanced. Instead of saying St. Mary's is doing small groups for our Lenten initiative, you would say something like, there are a number of individuals in our community who are going to be hosting small groups this Lent. And I want to invite so-and-so up to share with you what they're doing. So there's like a subtle shifting of the ownership, okay? Father isn't saying, we're doing this. He's saying, there are a number of individuals in our community who are doing this, okay? And that way they own it. This is something that they're doing, even with signups, right? So signups could be a good thing or a bad thing. And it all depends on the particular circumstances. This is something, the nuances and the applications of this is something that we'll probably get into next month when we do the 4-part series. But generally speaking, the more you try to announce small groups broad and wide, the more you run the risk of decreasing the ownership of the individual. You just have to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Is it worth, because maybe there is a time, where after you have enough people who are formed to do this and are doing this, maybe there is a time where you say, like, in order to create a cultural shift in your community, you're going to start announcing this and you're going to start promoting it as something that a lot of people in our community are doing. Our culture in this parish is to have community and to own to own your mission. And so there are tons of people in our community who are doing this. And so there can be ways of doing this that are really helpful. But that's a wonderful question. And it's one of those things that's just, it involves, it's an art. It's not a science. Great question.
Thank you, Peter.
Mm-hmm. So maybe let's do that, right? Let's move into the last part of this orientation to small group evangelization. The question is, how do you build and shepherd lay apostolate through small groups? What would be like the best way to get this going, get it off the ground? Because we understand that there's a risk here of becoming too like overreachy and killing initiative. But if we don't do anything, then what are we doing? So how do we do this, right? Well, what we're going to look at the best evangelist who ever walked the face of the earth. We're going to look at Jesus. What did Jesus do? We tend to think of Jesus's public ministry as preaching and teaching to the masses, the itinerant preacher, and he did that. But humanly speaking, that aspect of his mission was a failure. He lost a bunch of his disciples at the Bread of Life discourse, and then again when he was crucified, they all left him except for John and his mother and a couple other ladies. So how are we here today? How do we understand that his mission actually wasn't a failure? How do we know that his mission was a wild success? Because of the 12, the original small group. Okay, what did Jesus do? Well, beginning of his public ministry in the Gospel of Luke, it says that he spent a night in prayer. So the first thing he did was he discerned. He discerned from among his disciples. So he called a bunch of people together and he had a group of disciples, and then he discerned 12 whom he invited to be with him and eventually named as apostles. Then he formed them and trained them. Okay, we distinguish a bit between formation and training. We don't separate them. But Jesus, he spent life with them. He, ate with them and hung out with them. And then he took a few of them and, said, hey, why don't you guys come on with me? And I'm going to raise this girl from the dead. Watch how I do this, and then he would explain the meanings of things to them. And then he would have them figure stuff out. And so he over the course of 2.5 years or so, he formed and trained them, the 12, the original small group, and then he sent them. He sent them a couple times during his public ministry, but then finally at the end, he sent them off, and he sent the Holy Spirit to shepherd them, and Peter, the shepherd of shepherds, the servant of the servants of God. And then what did they do? Well, they went off and did the only thing that they really knew how to do, the same thing. So, Thomas went over to India, and James stayed put, and Peter went to Antioch and eventually to Rome, and the other apostles went to other places, and they would move into a community, and they would set up shop, and they would start working, and they would become friends with people, and then from their friends, they would discern the people who are disposed to hear the good news in a more intimate way, and they would invite them in to a small group of disciples and form and train them and send them off. Where would they send them to? They would send them to their friends and their coworkers and their family, or they would sometimes send them off to different locations. Or in the case of St. Paul, he himself would leave and he would send them to their community, and then he would shepherd them by writing letters back to them, or sending off emissaries to different places. And so we see this as the beginnings of the MO, the modus operandi of the church. When we look at what St. Francis did and St. Dominic and St. Ignatius of Loyola, St. Jose Maria, we look at how the church has grown throughout antiquity. This is kind of the primary mechanism, the primary mode of how the church has grown. Discern a few, invite them into a process of formation and training, then send them off to their respective circles of influence, and then shepherd those individuals as they evangelize. So it's the shepherding of individuals. It's not the managing of small groups. It's not the coordination of volunteers. In some cases, that may be the case, but the standard case is shepherding individuals in their apostolate. What does this look like? So, what we call a training group. So this part here, I hope you can see my little arrow. I'm circling the training group. Okay, this is focusing in on this part right here, formation and training. So I would say this: who are your most faithful, available, and teachable parishioners? Okay, make a list of 40 people. That's your goal. Okay, pick a novena to pray and pray for the Lord to send you names. Okay, and over the course of the next 9 days, as you're praying this novena, I don't care who it's a novena to, it could be the novena to the Holy Spirit, your favorite saint, I don't know. Ask this person to send you names, to send you individuals, and write those names down and start praying for those people. At the end of that, you got a list of 40 people. Okay, then you're going to discern who are the most faithful, available, and teachable of those people. Who are the people in your life who are living lives of discipleship already? They might be obvious, they might be not obvious. And invite those people into a process of formation that we call the training group. It's a process of a few months where you're going to dive deeply into mission formation. Okay, in our process, when we partner with a parish, we work with the ministry staff and we help them execute this mission process. And so the first couple months, we're working with you to help you discern those people, who they are. Tell me, why do you think this person is faithful? Why do you think this person is available? Why do you think this person is teachable? And we kind of sift through what those words mean and what those words don't mean. And then we help to prioritize who those people are. And then we work with you to teach you how to invite those people into a training group. Because there's a wrong way to invite people into a training group. Okay? The wrong way essentially invites people to do something for the parish. So that's kind of perpetuating this notion of ministry overreach, perpetuating this notion that they're going to be a volunteer or a ministry leader or something like that. No, instead, it's a little bit of like a flip-flop. Instead of you asking them to do something for the parish, you're asking them if you can do something for them, right? So you're discerning who are the people who want to live their faith and share their faith more effectively. You're going to cast this vision to them about living their faith and sharing it more effectively, being a better husband, father, professional, coworker, wife, mother, the best that they can be, to be a disciple right there and to be apostle right there. Can I help you to achieve that? I want to give you an opportunity to dive deeply into formation with a few other people like you. And we're going to, iron sharpens iron. We're going to create a community of apostles, and we're going to do this together. So you invite them into this process that's going to last a few months. And this process is a weekly training group. So you, as the faithful, it's Jesus and the 12. Okay, it's Francis and the 5, or how many he had. And we provide a very specific curriculum that provides mission formation. And I have a slide later on that shows what that consists of, where you're forming them more deeply in the habits of prayer and discipleship, growth and virtue, but then you're also forming them in an apostolic outlook to see the world around them differently than what they had already, that everything has a redemptive quality. And then you're going to help. So gosh, I get excited about that. So you're providing this formation over the course of a few months. You're getting together as a small group weekly, but then you're also getting together regularly one-on-one with each of those people. This is your role as a parish staff. As a ministry staff, you are focused like a hawk on forming individuals for apostolate. The best use of your time is to be very inefficient with your time. Instead of working with the masses, you're going to be a poor steward of resources, just like Jesus was. He spent a disproportionate amount of his time with a few. Jesus had a big enough vision to think really small. And so you're going to enter into that vision with him and think really small. Just 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. Jesus started with 12. He lost one. Okay. So he had 11. Okay. And so at the end of that formation period, you're going to send those people. Where are you going to send them? You're going to send them right back to where they always have been, to their circles of influence. But what they're going to do is they're going to become more intentional and organized with their apostolate. They're going to own it by starting a small group. Jim is going to start a men's group. Barb is going to start a mom's group. Marissa is going to start a working moms group. Jim and Susan are going to do a couples group. Elizabeth is going to do a group for seniors. Lisa is going to do a young adult group. And they're going to do these groups, and they're going to reach out to the people who the Lord is calling them to reach out to. And so these 8 individuals, or 7 or 6 or whatever, they're going to start their own groups. They're going to happen in their homes, or at an empty boardroom, or at a liquor store, wherever they happen to be. So then what you're going to do is you're going to shepherd these individuals. You're not going to manage the small groups. You're not going to be taking attendance every week, but you're going to be shepherding these individuals. You're going to be helping them to grow more deeply in their interior life, their prayer life, to grow in virtue. You're also going to help them in their apostolate to these individuals. You're going to help form in them a supernatural outlook that thinks of other people first. You're going to ask them who you're really excited about in your group. Who's on your heart more? Who's on your mind? Oh, Eric is on my mind. Well, why is Eric on your mind? He'll tell me, is there something that he shared in the group someday? Yeah, he said this, that, and the other thing. Well, what do you think the Lord is calling you to do about that? You're going to shepherd this person in that apostolate. and help them to stretch themselves, help them to get comfortable getting uncomfortable. And so while you're shepherding those individuals in their apostolate that's happening through small groups, you're going to start the cycle again. You made a list of 40 people, okay, and you only invited 8 people into the group. Now, 6 months later, you're going to invite more people, and you're going to do the training group all over again with a new group of people. Or maybe you met someone new. Maybe you're going to keep adding to that list of 40. You're always going to be cultivating new relationships with people so you can invite them into something that they want to do to begin with. Again, you're not asking people to do something for the church, but you're discerning who wants to do this, who's been praying for something like this, who is chomping at the bit to do something new, to do something a little bit more adventurous. The Lord is going to guide you to those people. And this process repeats 1 to 2 times a year. You do this, it takes about 6 months, and you send, 6 to 10 people out back to where they never left, okay? And they're going to reach out to their friends. You're going to do it again. You're going to do it again. You're going to do it again. So at the end of 2 years, you could be shepherding, 20 to 30 people. At the end of 3 years, you could be shepherding, 30 to 50 people. And so what you are going to start seeing is that your capacity is going to start getting scrunched, because every time you do this process, it takes more time because you're shepherding more people. But see, this inefficient way of doing ministry actually is as efficient as it gets, because these people are reaching people who only they can reach, who you could never dream about reaching. Your circle of concern is the warm bodies in the pews. Your circle of concern is all the people who aren't in the pews. But you're gonna be so concerned about all those people that you're actually gonna focus only on the people who are in your circle of influence, because you're gonna become very confident that they're going to be reaching those people. They're going to be reaching the warm bodies in the pews. They're going to be reaching the people in the office building. They're going to be reaching the people at the gym, the school parents, all the people who are kind of disengaged or underengaged. You don't have to bash your head against a wall thinking how to reach those people, because this is how you're going to reach those people, through the apostolate of the individuals. So if we lay this over the training group and the shepherding of the individuals, the disciple makers, okay, the DMs, the disciple makers, this is the focus of parish ministry. It's centralized, it's predictable, it's stable, it's in your circle of influence. And the small groups become the apostolate of the individual, decentralized. They're kind of unpredictable. They're kind of unstable. There isn't a certain way that they're supposed to multiply. There isn't a certain way that they're supposed to do their thing, because their apostolate is their apostolate. If we try to impose a certain way of multiplication, we're going to end up messing with people's apostolate. For example, oftentimes when ministry professionals are dealing with people doing small groups, they get frustrated with small groups that last a long time, like 2, 3, 4 years, and they'll call them cliques. That might be the case, might be a clique, but it might not be, because the guys who I'm dealing with, when they first started in the group, they might have been really far from our Lord. One guy might be dealing with a porn addiction. Another guy might be dealing with real poor communication with his wife. Another guy might be dealing with something else. I don't know. And my apostolate to these guys is kind of sensitive. And baby steps over the course of years might have brought someone from being far from our Lord to praying every day, but it takes years. And so in that sense, it's not a clique. It's a different kind of apostolate. There might be another apostolate that is faster moving. So I'm kind of getting ahead to some false expectations. This type of ministry, one of the false expectations is overnight success, that this is going to increase mass attendance and confessions and giving like within a year. It's going to change our parish in like a year or two. Nope, we're talking like 10 years, maybe 5. You're going to start seeing differences. Another false expectation is this is a ministry that's eventually going to run itself, because you got all these people who are becoming activated, but these people who are activated need shepherds. Every one of us is prone to mission drift, every one of us. And so your role becomes a shepherd to guide these people through the wind and the waves of interior life and apostolate. So it actually takes more time as the ministry matures, not less time. But it becomes by far the most fruitful thing you do, and so it's worth it. Sometimes people think, oh, people are going to start coming out of the woodwork. No, actually, sometimes that happens. But to keep expanding this, you have to develop a ministry of, fishing. Okay, so fish, not bobber fishing, cast and wait. Okay, but like going out into the deep. You have to go and find people and build relationships with people, and then invite them into this. So these are some other false expectations. Another quick slide here. I mentioned mission formation. What's the curriculum that we provide? The curriculum that we provide is composed of this. It covers all of these aspects of formation. So in the training group, you go through all these topics. So I'm going to pause right there for questions.
Peter, we're kind of at the point where the questions are very specific.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to hold off on asking those. I'll work with you and with Saul on getting those types of answers so that we can post them. A lot of them are things that will be covered once we dive deeper in April. So I think we're good on questions at this point.
Great. It's an exciting way to do ministry. And like anything, it has its ups and downs, and it's like parenting, like sometimes you have the exhilaration of a kid that starts, doing something great. And then there's also the grind of, the everyday. But I would just throw this question out there. If we're not doing this, what are we doing? If we're not being very intentional and very focused on forming and equipping our laity to have ownership in their apostolate, what are we doing? Jesus said, I'll make you fishers of men. Again, I don't think he meant sitting on the dock and casting and waiting for the bobber. Go out into deep waters, lower your nets for a catch. It's that type of ministry and that type of apostolate that applies to both ministry and apostolate. It's both arduous because, lower your nets for a catch, you're going to get big catches and you're going to pull muscles and you're going to get wet and all that kind of stuff. But it's as we exert ourselves, we're deeply fulfilled. Because we're doing this for love, and we're operating in a way that the Lord has intended. And small groups are that like primary kind of universal, mechanism for people to own their apostolate. So I just want to encourage you to really press into this, especially if there are things that maybe have challenged you, or you kind of cock in your head a little bit and be like, I don't know about that. Really, I want to encourage you to really press into that and not react too harshly too quickly. So next steps for this. If you have any more questions, I want to encourage you to reach out to Saul. Saul is on our staff, and if there are questions that are a little bit more technical in nature, he'll be able to kind of sift those and direct those to me. Saul is also able to answer questions about like what it means to work with us, that sort of a thing. But then also tune in beginning April 21st. I think it's at 12 Eastern, right, Andrew?
No, 2 Eastern.
2 Eastern. Okay,
Yes.
sorry. Oh, I did that wrong. Yeah, okay. 2 o'clock Eastern for a 4-part series. I'm Central Time, so I messed that up. Where we're going to dive more deeply and get a little bit more granular in this type of work.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
Yeah, so just to touch on this a little bit more, so those sessions that are going to be taking place starting on April 21st, it's going to be one every week on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock Eastern. So those are really, like Peter said, we're going to be diving deeper into what was discussed today. Following that, one of the main things that Evangelical Catholic offers is coaching. The Reach More coaching that Peter has walked through, how they work with parishes and campuses and things of that nature to help you to do this process. So we're really excited about the timing of this because Virginia is starting to open up, right? Like we got good news earlier this week that we can now have 50 people together socially indoors. We'll have 100 outdoors. So it looks like things are starting to open up. It's a great opportunity for us to be looking at, well, what can we be providing our parishes as we're allowed to start doing things again? As Mass starts to get back to normal, what are we also going to provide parishioners so that they can grow in their faith and that they can just be diving deeper and encountering Jesus more. So this is one option. It's one that we're happy to provide. And if you have specific questions that you can't go to Saul with, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Office for Evangelization. As for what's next,